I have a confession to make. I was born young enough to know how to use the terms cool, dope, and things like that, but I wasn't quite old enough to enjoy the elegance that is the term wizard when something's wizard. And I have a feeling in about 20 years' time that's going to come back around again. And you're probably wondering, why is Darren end of the day talking about this? It's appropriate because our closing talk for the day is about the conflict between generations in the tech industry. We've already experienced this day in, day out, outside the tech industry. Your kid comes in, they say a term, you have no clue what they mean. You might even be someone 50, 60 who's still trying to get their heads around LOL. So Powell is at least here to try and help us get our heads around this issue specifically within tech itself. Powell, the stage is yours.
All right, thank you very much. Hi everyone, my name is Paweł. I'm happy to have you here, especially as this is the last slot of the conference today, so probably you're everyone a little bit tired, so I appreciate that. So just a brief introduction of myself. I used to do a lot of coding in Java, but then I kind of switched to the dark side. So now I'm taking care of several teams of developers and DevOps at Xibia Poland. And today I will tell you about generations and conflict in generations, especially in our industry. So this is our plan. So first, to be on the same page, I will tell you a little bit about what those generations actually mean. What are those stuff about myths, facts there, those differences, some theories about that. Then we will move to particular generations and focus on each of them. And then the third part is sometimes called, like a miscellanea. If you don't know how to call the last part of the presentation, miscellanea is usually a good idea. So disclaimer, there's a lot of memes about generations, about boomers and millennials fighting each other, so there will be a lot of memes in this presentation. Some of them may be offensive, so please keep your distance. All right, so let's start with, we have a movie about how people born in different, it's a short movie, people born in different decades, how they might react to hitting themselves in an arm for the door. So let's look at that. There's no sound in here, but it doesn't really matter. Yeah, sometimes it looks a bit like this. All right, so our first act, the general idea of generations and what's in it about this whole conflict. So the idea of generation, this is quite an old topic. If you see millennials and boomers and stuff like this, usually it refers to so-called Western world. Right? The Western world, the definition of Western world was also changing a little bit, like, history went a little bit differently in the United States, in Poland or Lithuania over the last 70 years, for instance, when mostly those generations were formed. But in the end, we are part of this Western world now, happily. So the idea is that basically during the first 20 years of your life, more or less, all the events, the cultural changes, the technology that you are using, the new technology that appear, have high impacts on your personality. And because of that, we can somehow segment the population in those more or less 20-year segments of different generations that have something in common. Right? Sometimes it's a bit shorter, up to like 13 years, sometimes it's a bit longer, depends. There are also different definitions, so don't be very attached to exact years that I will be talking about. Right? This idea is at least 100 years old. There was some work by Karl Mannheim, who was working in Germany mostly. You can see some of his works around 1950-ish, because that was the time when it was translated to English, right? So here on those pictures, you can see some examples of technology, some examples of global events, and also there's a boat there, right? So you might be wondering, what's about this boat there? So the boat should act like a shotgun hanged over chimney in the first act of a play. If you see the shotgun in the first act, you know that in the third act, we will be shooting from that shotgun, right? So in case of the boat, we'll get into this boat in Act 3 and we'll be rowing. So bear with me. All right, so to be on the same page, this is the picture from Wikipedia, by the way, to know which generation is which. We start with generation Alpha, which is basically children up to more or less 11 years old currently. On the right side, you have the current age range for those generations. Then we have our Gen Z, which is roughly 11 to 27, so entering the workforce, we could say. We have millennials, often called Gen X, who are currently 27 to 43, more or less. We have Gen X, which is 43 and approaching 60. We have baby boomers, so the generation born just after the Second World War. They are roughly 60 to 70 something, right? And we have also silent generation. Probably we won't meet them at work, or at least the chances are not that high. So this geometry here, when you look at particular generation, they start in the left bottom. So this is the year of birth, and we are going up to around 18 years old. We have this so-called productive period, like up to around 60, and then going down to roughly 70. And there should be like a long tail, or hopefully we can still live after 60 or 70 when we are no longer that much productive, right? So this is more or less the breakdown of our generations. How does it look in real society? So we have example from Poland. I was able to get data from actually 5 years ago. Each of those bars represent 5 years periods. So what we can see here is on the left, you have this peak, the red peak of baby boomers, right? So people that are 60 something. Then we have a little bit less. We have the demographic low. So we have the X's, and then younger X's and older Y's. So millennials are basically another peak. So those are children of baby boomers. Okay, and we are still again going low. We have Gen Z, we have Gen Alpha, and we would expect to have another demographic high. But times changed a little bit. People are not having that many children currently in the Western world, so it kind of flattens out in the end. So how does it translate to our industry? Okay, here we have two examples. Those bars are actually each 1 year each. So the top example is a software house from Poland. Right? What we can see here, the vertical axis is just the number of people that were born in a given year in the company. What we are interested in is the proportions of that, right? So we can see that the whole lot of people, like 80% more or less of people, are millennials, so Gen Y, right, the blue. Then on the right, we have a little bit of Gen Z that is entering our workforce. On the left, we have, and again, 10% of Gen X. We don't really have any people that are over 60 in this company. And the bottom example is actually from Netherlands, right? This is kind of like a software house, but more like a consulting company. And we can see it's a bit different. So millennials is maybe rather 70% than 80%. And we have twice as much X's, right? On the left, the orange one, we have a lot of X's, and we even have some baby boomers that are in red on the very left side. Right? A little bit less Gen Z probably. The reasons are twofold. First, because it's more consultancy profile, so they rather hire more senior people in general, more experienced. And also the industry, the IT industry in general in Netherlands started a bit earlier than in Eastern and Central Europe, right? So there's more people in 40s, 50s, 60s that started as a programmers or tech people. So those are those differences, right? So millennials are the biggest part of IT industry currently. We can say that for sure. So what about those myths and facts about this conflict, right? Are those generational differences real or not, right? If you Google for differences, then you will get a lot of articles, videos about how to deal with boomers, how to deal with millennials, or the ideas. But if you Google for whether they are myths, right? If you just add the word myth to your search, then you will get, again, a lot of articles saying that it's all bullshit, it's not true, it's ageism, right? It's discrimination, we are all different, etc. And you cannot, right? You cannot stereotype and just close people in buckets, right? So the question now is, which is true, right? As usually, if you ask people in IT, works on my machine, and also it depends. So we'll look into those dependencies a little bit in our first part. So if you look at some press releases during the last 50 years, usually there was some articles about difficult coworkers who are in their 20s, right? 50 years ago, it was about boomers. So boomers is this difficult young generation that don't have any ideals and don't know how to live, right? Then after some 15 years or so, it was all about Gen X. Then when I was starting my work, by the way, I'm 1980, 43, so I'm 40, almost 41 currently, so elder millennial. So when I was entering, there was a lot of rant about millennials, how difficult they are to work with. And currently you can see a lot of articles about Gen Z, that, hey, it's a difficult generation, right? So this perception shifts with time. If you look at the existence of conflicts in generation, in the scientific literature, you can find a lot of examples as old as ancient Athens, right? So 2.5 millennia, basically. There was some conflict in some city, in some century between a group that was younger and older. There's material about conflicts in medieval times and generational backgrounds, about Renaissance, about, Europe, America, even Africa, all those basically possibilities, right? There's a notion of generational narcissism. So we have kind of built in like our own superiority, and we think that people who are younger don't know life, right? They don't care about traditions, etc. People who are older are halting progress, it's difficult to talk to them, etc. And we are, of course, the best generation, right? We have the best of both worlds. You can see some examples again about younger generation dating back 3,000 years ago, basically some quotes. If you look again at scientific literature, you can see that usually 4 generations are considered on the current job market, right? And usually they are divided into halves. There are 2 younger generations and 2 older generations, right? So currently, this younger generation is Gen Z and millennials, and you can sometimes see the quote that Gen X is like the last adult generation, the last serious generation, knows what's going on, right? But if you look at some science from 15 years old or maybe 20 years old ago, then it shifted by 1, right? So X's were those still young ones and inexperienced and difficult, and boomers were the last adult generation, right? So this perception of how our generation behaves is shifting in time. Also, we change as we age, right? Biology. So those are the examples of our 5, the big 5 of personality traits. So probably one of the best models of our personality. Basically, we have some research that proves that as we age, basically mostly our personality shapes up until 20 years old, but between 20 and 50 it still shifts a little bit, right? And our conscientiousness, so our like orderliness, right, goes up as we age. We are more ordered, more experienced. Our agreeableness, so we are more diplomatic as we age, usually. Again, this is the usual, the statistics, right? Our openness goes down. So we have our schemes, our ways, and we are not that open for doing stuff in a different way often. Our extraversion goes down, right? So if you are 20, going for a pub crawl is a great idea. But if you are 40, maybe you can sleep a little bit longer or something like that, okay? I heard some counterexamples that after you hit the midlife crisis in 40-something, then again there is a bump extraversion because you are drinking a lot in pubs. I'm not sure about this, maybe. But the general trend is extraversion is going down and neuroticism is going down. So if you're highly neurotic, then you're quite afraid, you're thinking about all the stuff that can hurt you and stuff like this. You're emotionally unstable, and statistically, as we age, we stabilize emotionally, right? So colloquially speaking, we don't give a damn anymore about what others think about us. So our neuroticism goes down. And then we still have to remember that there are many factors to personality. So most important factor is this individual differences, right? So there is some statistics about some generation that some event had impact on them, or some types of upbringing have had some impact. Then the most important thing is what happened to you, right? If there is a generation where there was a lot of divorces and it had some statistical impact on a generation, it mostly matters whether your parents were divorced or not, right? And also our natural preferences. So basically what kind of nervous system we randomized, let's say, at character creation when we were born. So this is like a half probably of our personality. The other half is upbringing. Also, we have cultural differences, right? So depending whether you were born in Poland, Lithuania, in United States, Germany, Japan, or what have you, you would have kind of a different, let's say, social default, right? You would behave a bit differently. And then on top of that, we have the generational differences, so statistical differences that people in different age have a bit different personality traits. So there's a lot of it to this mix. So as a piece of trivia, kind of fun theory that is marked like pseudoscience even on Wikipedia, but I decided to include it just for fun. There's a theory that history repeats every 80 years or so, every 4 generations or so, and every 4 generations there are so commonalities between them, right? It's mostly about American history, or broadly speaking, Anglo-Saxon history. But the idea is that every 80 years there's a big conflict. Like there was a Second World War, then before that there was a civil war in the States, then before that there was an independence war, and then, for instance, if you were 20 when the war started, you had to go to fight, right, to the front, and then you had to rebuild the society after that, and you had to grow up quickly. And then 20 or 30 years, people born 20 or 30 years were born into, periods of stability and prosperity, and they get a little bit bored, they did some revolution, stuff like this, and at some point the history repeats themselves. Right? So it's just a piece of fun theory, but it's a bit controversial, and I wouldn't be very hang on that. The second book, the authors even went further, like up to 25, I believe, generations, 7 crises or something like this. So that's just a piece of trivia. What I wanted you to get out of this is that the topic is tricky, right? There are some statistical differences between generations, but you shouldn't use them as a hammer in your people toolbox, right? This is a millennial hammer, this is a boomer hammer, more like just a delicate tool to help you a little bit. Okay, so let's move on to our particular generations then. As an opening bracket, we start with the silent generation. This is a generation you don't really see at work probably anymore, like people 78 plus, maybe some like old CEO or board member or something like this. So I won't be going into much details on them. Just wanted to include them to be complete. And also I wanted to find, for each generation, I want to find some people that were very influential on our industry. Right? So we have examples from silent generation of people who made a lot of impact on computer science and on software industry. So we start with Mr. Gordon Moore, who was a co-founder of Intel and author of the Moore's Law, right, about exponential growth of the power of semiconductors. We have Margaret Hamilton, who was the author of software for Apollo mission spacecraft in the 60s, 70s. We have Donald Knuth, who is we can say that he's the father of algorithm analysis, right? The author of book Art of Computer Programming that he's writing from like end of 60s, I believe, and still working on that. We have Barbara Liskov, if you know this, often asked on the job interview about the solid principle. So there's a Liskov substitution principle, and that's coming from Barbara Liskov. She did a lot of research in early computer science. We have Alan Kay, who was the author of Smalltalk language and also pioneer of graphical user interfaces. We have Brian Kerrigan and Ken Thompson, known from the first C programming book, I believe. Ken Thompson they were both working on the Unix, and also Ken Thompson is author of the Go language. And we have Larry Ellison, who is co-founder of the Oracle Corporation. So those are our examples of influential people in the silent generation. Let's move to baby boomers, and we'll have a little bit more details here. Right, so baby boomers born just after the Second World War, currently in their 60s basically and 70s. You can call them the analog generation. So basically when they were young, when they were starting to work, the world was analog. You were using pen and paper to do stuff, right? And computers came later after that in common use, so they had to switch at some point to using that. I have some influences. So what were happening in the world? What was happening? There was a Cold War, right? So basically there was a fear that it will go hot and will be annihilated by the nuclear blast at some point. We had massive changes in transportation. So basically in 60 years, we went from this funny wooden airplanes that could jump like a few meters into going to space, basically. The dominant media was radio and TV, maybe TV more in the United States and Western Europe, probably in Poland more like radio at this time. The business was analog, right? So we have a typewriter here. This is the picture from Poland, from Warsaw. In the 50s, there was the building of the palace of art of science. So basically, communism is rising in Eastern Europe, unfortunately. If you ask Americans about important stuff, probably assassination of JFK might come up. Computers are basically, those things used by scientists mostly, not really business, like common business. Okay, so now what to do with baby boomers then? So baby boomers in general like face-to-face conversations. They have high power distance, meaning that if you have some formal title, you get some respect out of the box. If you're a boss, if you're a doctor even, right? They value this structure, hierarchy, stability, loyalty. Sometimes they were people who worked for like 30 years for one company, for instance. They value hard skills. So what you can do with your hands or with your mind is more important than your, social skills and ability to speak softly and beautifully, right? If you want to make them happy, it's good to put them in a position of some kind of authority, like a leader or mentor, so they can share their life and business experience with younger colleagues. And to continue our tradition, we have some people with influence over our industry. So we have Björn Strostrup, who was the author of C++ language. We have Steve Wozniak from Apple. We have James Gosling, the creator of Java. Bill Gates, probably most well known from Microsoft. Guido von Rossum, the creator of Python. We have Tim Cook, currently from Apple. Anders Heisberg, the creator of C# language. And Jeff Bezos, the famous bookseller and also virtual machine seller currently, probably even more. All right, so let's move on to our next generation, the Xers. So Xers 43 to 59, roughly. Again, those numbers can differ depending on which research you look, in which country. Sometimes it's 1, 2, 3 years in a different direction, so don't be religious about this. The name X came from the, let's say, changing situation currently. So society was changing, technology is changing at a very rapid pace at those times, and people didn't know what comes out from these children, basically, so they use X as a metaphor of unknown. You can call them a digital immigrants because they often started in more analog world, but they maybe in their young adulthood or a bit earlier they transitioned to computers or electronics. Sometimes you can find names like latchkey kids. It comes from the fact that it was often the case that parents stayed later at work, or there was a high chance that they are divorced or single parents, so they had to work a lot. So children had to go to an empty home with a key hanged on their neck, right? Hence latchkey kids. Sometimes the name MTV generation comes up, especially in America probably. And in some articles I find the name the last adult generation currently, right? Okay. Some influences. Here we have a picture from introduction of martial law in Poland in 1981, if I believe correctly. There is a dissolution of Soviet Union, right? We have some culture going from west to east through the falling Iron Curtain. There was a disaster in Chernobyl, 1986 probably. We have some first personal computers, maybe not like PCs, but often like Commodore, ZX Spectrum, Amiga, stuff like this. First cell phones are a rarity, so rather maybe a CEO or some directors could have this phone that was like a brick, right? And from popular electronics, we have a Walkman here. So what to do with Gen X, right? Gen X is by default have a little bit higher autonomy statistically, right? Because it was often the case that parents don't spend that much time on them compared to actually previous and the next generations, right? They still value authority, rules, and procedures, but not as hard as boomers. They are often quite keen on their career. Like they see themselves through the lenses of the career. So they would think about themselves as I am a programmer, I am a manager, maybe I'm Paweł or I'm Anna or whoever. And they often work hard. So if you are a team leader, a manager, or just a good colleague, you might want to look at some signs for burnout and stuff like this, because it might statistically happen more often with Gen X, so we have to be careful about that. All right, moving to our examples. So we have Michael Dell, so the Dell company, the producer of computer equipment. We have Satya Nadella from Microsoft. We have Rasmus Lerdorf, the author of PHP language. We have Linus Torvalds, so Linux, of course, and Git. We have John Carmack, so gaming industry, Quake, Doom, Wolfenstein, stuff like this. Elon Musk, the expert in managing the social networks currently, sometimes rockets and electric cars. We have Larry Page from Google, and we have Jack Dorsey, who is actually the founder of Twitter. And we can move on to our millennials, or Gen Y, so the most widespread generation in the IT. So aged currently 28 to 43, more or less. Name Y is of course after X, but also Y from the meaning phonetically why something is happening. So millennials often need to know why something is happening, they need some explanations, some reasons why we should do things, not just I can tell them to do something and they will do this. Sometimes you can find names like 90s kids, and by the way, this is about being a kid in 90s, not being born in the 90s, right? So if you're 85 or something, you're still a 90s kid, basically. If you are born in 1999, not really. And we can call them digital natives, because usually they had some access to computers from early age, but not necessarily connected to the internet. Right, so some influences. Maybe not from the earliest childhood, but maybe a little bit later. We had this first internet, so the fun of dialing with a modem, 56K, downloading the MP3 and hoping nobody will pick up the phone on the line because it will break. Like the world was changing, basically the Cold War was over, so there was an expansion of European Union and the NATO, and 30 years of stabilization, basically, and unipolarity, the hegemony of the United States. We have some first social networks, and this is the GG is an example of instant messenger from Poland that was popular 20-something years ago. We have popularity of cell phones, not yet the smartphones, but cell phones, right? If you ask about important stuff, especially Americans, there was the 9/11. By the way, the 9/11 was like a border between millennials and Gen Z. So the oldest Gen Z were 4 at this time, 4 years old, so they won't remember. If you remember 9/11, then you're a millennial or older in general. Instead of Walkmans, we have Discmans. There was this crisis of 2008 and 9, basically. It wasn't actually heartfelt in Poland, my country, because I think we are one of the few countries that actually managed to get with positive GDP growth, but there was a lot of problems in Europe and United States, and it was actually a time when I was looking for my first job, so it wasn't that easy back then in international corporations. Okay, and we have personal computers that are getting popular and quite widespread. Okay, so how to deal with millennials then? Basically, millennials are the most educated generation so far. Right? So for instance, in Poland in 1990, there was 300,000 students, and just 15 years later, there was 2 million, and there was no significant change in population. Right? So a lot of people started to educate themselves more. Millennials like technology in general. There's this term of helicopter parents, that if something wrong is going with the child, the parents will fly in a helicopter and help them. So because of that, on average, millennials are not that autonomous as Gen X, for instance, again, on average. And they introduced this concept of life-work balance in a higher degree. So millennials care about their life, not only work. Right? They just use work as a means to earn money and have life. And they have much lower power distance. So if you're a boss, you have to still earn some respect, and you just have it because of your title. Okay, they are more flexible in general. They are more keen to work in a team. They pay attention to personal brands. They are often freelancers because it gives them more control over their time and their work in general. And they are more open to changes, more direct in the approach. So as a tradition, we have our people that were quite influential from the millennial generation. Might be a little bit difficult if it was a quiz, probably, to get it right. Usually when I'm doing this presentation live, I mean on-site in person, then I'm doing a quiz of how many people do you recognize, but it's a bit difficult if you are just on a stream. I would say impossible even. So of those people, Ryan Dahl is the creator of the I forget it. The JavaScript on the backend, so Node.js framework. We have the Zhang Yiming, who is the creator of TikTok, the founder of TikTok. We have Daniel Ek, who is the founder of Spotify. Mark Zuckerberg, probably the most recognizable from here. On Facebook, Melanie Perkins from Canva, so the designer software. Patrick Collison, the founder of Stripe, so payment platform. We have Whitney Hurt, who is the co-founder of Tinder and Bumble, so dating apps. And we have Evan Spiegel, who is co-founder of Snapchat. All right. And we can move to our Gen Z now. So Gen Z 11 to 27, so we have quite a lot of them at our work currently, especially if you started to work at 20, 22 at the beginning of your studies, which is becoming more common probably with current generation. Sometimes they are called like post-millennials, not very originally, or snowflakes, because each of them is unique, right? Or Zoomers, like a play word on boomers. 3C, so connect, communicate, change. We can also call them like online natives. So when they started, not only when they were born, they were young, not only computers were widespread, but also everything was online already, right? Just connected to the internet. Influences for Gen Z. So there was a pandemic of COVID-19, of course. So remote schooling, remote first work. We have smartphones, right? So everyone basically has a very powerful device in their pocket that they can give them access to whole knowledge of the world, or funny videos of cats over the internet, right? We have this, let's say, globalization period that is kind of breaking right now, right? We have contenders, we have China, we have Iran, we have Russia, who wants to remodel the world that was created after the end of Cold War. We have the war in Ukraine, some tensions all around the world, so we don't know what will happen. We have some examples of popular social networks, like Snapchat is no longer popular, as I learned during this presentation, but I stopped at the Facebook level mostly. So probably TikTok is the most popular, although they want to ban this in the US. We'll see how it goes. We have, let's say, the higher environment conscientiousness in society, right? So people see that climate is changing, we have to do something with that. We have the growing polarity between social groups, right? This is the picture from the protest in Poland, actually, about abortion a few years ago. So basically, to simplify, we have this left and right, basically, and at this point, they don't really talk to each other, and they don't want to, right? That's quite different in the past. But also, this is because of social media also, because if you have high polarity and people are just arguing, there's a lot of hate in the internet, and more people will click the ads, and there's better traffic. So not a good thing in general. And we have technology that is starting to resemble magic, basically, especially with recent trends in AI, stuff that can be done. Okay, so what can we tell about Gen Z? Right? Gen Z are even more educated than our previous generations, right? They have all the access to basically all the knowledge that they want to get. So whether you want to learn a new front-end framework or learn how to do scrambled eggs, you have a tutorial on YouTube for that, right? Globalization is a norm. Globalization, diversity. They have friends all over the world, basically. Everyone is different. Everyone is individual, like this snowflake sometimes, right? As they say. So, for instance, if you are a team leader in a bank or manager, director, or whatever, and you have a team of developers that don't ever see any live client like a clerk would do, it doesn't make sense to force all of them to have, this bank logo as a background, right? Just let them do themselves. Let them do whatever they want. It won't change anything, and they would appreciate that. Right? They care about having a fun and chill at the workplace. That it's not a sad and standardized place, basically. All right. Some greater cause is nice. So we are not only working for money, but also for some other issues, like, I don't know, maybe let's care about ecology or some local communities or stuff like this, and do something meaningful with value, not only with earning money, right? Gamification works quite well. Gen Z is quite entrepreneurial generation, probably the most of it, because they have natively a lot of means to monetize stuff, right? You can produce some content for social media. You can easily set up some small internet shop to, for instance, sell some handcrafted stuff, right? Things like that. They care about quick feedback. This is probably, again, stuff from social media where people are just commenting and posting all the time. So it's not a good idea to wait like a year to give somebody feedback at work. Let's do this more often, maybe in smaller pieces. And the hierarchy is getting even flatter, right? So Gen Z, they don't care about formal hierarchies, about titles and stuff like this. They just naturally work with people around them, soft networks, and this works quite well. All right, so I was supposed to give you some examples of people that are important had a lot of impact from Gen Z, but I was trying to find someone, but we just don't know yet. Right? There are a lot of people who have startups that are probably on the way to be very successful, but they didn't make that high imprint yet. Right? We need to wait like 5 years or something, probably. Maybe when I do this presentation in 5 years, I will give you some pictures here. We'll see. All right, so this is our Gen Z, and just to finish our list of generation, we have the generation Alpha. We don't yet know a lot about them. They are just few years old. We don't know how they would behave in the workplace, in our industry, right? You might see that they are able to install an application on the phone before they are able to tie their shoelaces, for instance, right? So we have still a few years to get ready for that. How we are with time? Okay, not that bad, maybe. Let's move to our Act 3. Some miscellaneous stuff. I promised you the boat, right? Rowing the boat. So here's the boat. And let's imagine we will have crews from different generations that are told to row the boat, right? We have the crew, the boomers crew. There's a captain. Captain says we are rowing, and the boomers probably will be just rowing, right? There's no problem there. They will listen to the boss, right? Then we have Xers, right? The captain goes, we are rowing, and the Xers are asking, but hey, captain, where are we going? What's the direction? How fast should we go? Do we have some instrument to measure that? Where we are? What's the target? Are we on it, right? If you give them the sense of control and those targets and stuff like this, they are quite likely to get to rowing. Right, then we have our Ys, the millennials. The captain goes, we are rowing. The millennials would be like, hey, captain, but there's an engine on this boat. Why don't we just start the engine and relax a little bit? And the captain needs to have an explanation. So maybe we are in some special nature protection area, like the Mazura Lakes, for instance. There is a lot of wild animals there that cannot be disturbed. So basically, the law says that you cannot use an engine when we are swimming there in a boat. So you have to go either by sail or by rows. Right? So that's okay. There's an explanation, reasonable reason why we can't use the engine. Millennials can row on the situation. Okay. We have the Gen Z. Right? So captain goes, we are rowing. Gen Z is, hey captain, but is this island truly a good island that we are going to? Is the island money the only island we should visit? Maybe we should also visit some other islands, like ecology or local communities or greater cause or something like that. Okay, so this is more or less the metaphor how different generations might behave. Okay, some statistical data how personality traits were changing over time. So this is the Clifton Strength Finder. It's like 33 personality traits that are ranked, which are most prevalent. We can see we don't have Z's here. We have the older generation, the silent generation is sometimes called traditionalists, especially in the US. So what we can get from that is that the responsibility basically went down in our younger generations, but as a trade-off, we got empathy, right? Which is probably not that bad thing if you have more empathy towards other human beings, right? There was some change about 50, 70 years ago. Some change was noticed by Margaret Mead, who was an anthropologist. He was working with different types of culture. And basically, over like hundreds of thousands of years, everything was simple, right? We have post-figurative culture, so the ancestors worship. So basically, the older people are more wise and know stuff, and they are teaching the younger people. If I was a blacksmith in medieval times, my father would teach me how to live and how to be a blacksmith. I would teach my son how to be a blacksmith, and just going on for 100, 500 years or 1,000. But then technology started to accelerate. There were a lot of changes, and basically there was a shift that happened around 60, 70 years ago, when younger people started to know a lot of things about technology that older people didn't know. Right? Currently, I have to teach my mother how to use the smartphone. Right? sometime probably someone younger would have to teach me how to use some newer technology. So we went for this post-figurative culture to prefigurative culture of mysterious children. Yeah, teaching older people, and it was not an easy change, right? It was kind of a disturbance in our society. But we can use it to our advantage. So there's this idea of reverse mentoring introduced like 30 years ago. So Jack Welch from General Electric coming with idea to pair his executives and senior managers with younger people in a company, and they basically were mentoring each other both ways, right? So older were mentoring about business, and younger were, for instance, mentoring about technology. And there was advantage to that. So if you have some kind of formal mentoring programs in your companies, you might want to think about this idea. All right. Basically, we have a lot of research about diversity in teams that are operating on complex space of problems, right? That they have a lot of when they need a lot of autonomy, like in knowledge work and IT industry, they are better off if we have people with different kinds of view in a team, right? And it also includes age and generation. So if you have older people who have a lot of experience, seen a lot of stuff, they have this life wisdom that can be used in our software, in our products. And on the other hand, you have young people who have this spark of creativity. Sometimes they don't know that something is impossible, and they just do it, right, against all odds, basically. So that happens. So it's good to focus, on building bridges between our generations, not walls, right? Also, I was talking about a lot of those stuff about different generations, that they wanted this or that or introduce this or that. But in the end, it's probably, if you look at this list, all of us want most of it or almost all of it in some degree, right? You would like to have some degree of stability, have the feeling that there is some leader, a reasonable leader there, have some independence, know about our results, not overwork ourselves to death, have some flexibility, have some chill at work, get some feedback, be respected, and maybe think about some greater cause. So basically, certain generations introduce some items on this list, but then all generations basically take advantage from that, right? That's almost the last slide. It's blurred on purpose, so don't worry, your eyesight is okay. This is from the book Reinventing Organizations by Frederic Laloux. Basically, there was description of evolution of organizations, like 6-7 stages of organizations. And we can look at this journey through the generations, like through the lenses of evolution of our organizations, right? So certain generations give us targets at work, or sense of control, then some life-work balance, then maybe a better atmosphere and stuff like this, and all of those generations basically benefit from that. All right, so this is actually the last slide. So some contacts data. This QR code leads to my LinkedIn. So if you would like to join the party, do a virtual high five, maybe ask some questions that you don't want to ask in public, or just say hi, you're welcome to join. I'm also on Twitter or X or whatever it is called. If you want to have a note from this presentation, I have a blog that has a Java in name, but it's no longer really about Java. It's general software and peopleware most recently. So there's a two-part article. I believe the name is Generations of Developers. That is roughly based on this talk, or the vice versa. It kind of started at the same time. And also there are slides from this talk and some earlier recordings if you would like to share with someone. Right, so folks, take care of yourselves, take care of people around you, and thank you very much for attention. And now we can move to some questions, I guess.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paweł. Yeah, guys, if you do have any questions, drop them in the Q&A. First thing I got to ask is, what's the shade on Gen Z? No famous people? Snowflakes?
I'm sorry for that. I was trying really hard, to be honest, to find something, but we just don't know yet, right? Because
yeah.
But for instance, in case of Facebook, I believe Mark Zuckerberg was at 1 billion net worth when he was 22 or 23, right? So he was kind of like Gen Z in current years, but it was just not sure.
Maybe it's because the current state of tech, right? Like, you think of the evolutions, things like Twitter, Facebook, the times these came in. maybe in a few years, maybe I think the next big step, possibly you'll see some Gen Zers figuring out how to really innovate AI further, because I feel like that's the next big hurdle, right?
Yeah, probably. There was this time when you had a window to revolutionize a lot of stuff, like popularity of internet, so social platforms, and a lot of millennials took advantage from that, and then Gen Xers. So maybe Gen Z was a little bit, too late, like too late to discover the America and too early to, go to space, something like this.
Just blame your parents for not having you sooner. But
Yeah.
the interesting thought I had when you're going through this actually is like my thought was what do you think are the two hardest generations to integrate with each other in a work environment?
Oh, that's tricky, I'm mostly surrounded by millennials, right?
You sound so happy about that.
Am I? Well, it depends. I had I'm basically a manager for several teams. So when I was last looking, I probably had like 70 people in total that I was working with. Youngest were early 20s, and the oldest were mid 50s. I believe there was two-person
Okay.
in mid 50s, and it kind of checks out sometimes. But again, this is statistics, right? Like if you look at humility when people are talking about money, for instance, right? So people go to you for getting a pay rise, and some say, okay, maybe 10%, maybe 20. Some just say and go and say, okay, 80%, right? Without a notch. So that happens sometimes. But it's difficult to say which are the most difficult.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that Gen Z is the most difficult.
I guess it's like hard to gauge as well, right? Because like in some ways, you're showing the most valuable qualities for the different generations, right? And because you've got some similarities as it trends across, the other thing you have to keep in mind is like you might see less disengagement, less conflict between, a baby boomer and someone who's Gen Z, because that baby boomer is probably in a very superior position. So inherently there can't be
Mhm.
conflict there, right? Like usually you have people of similar age groups at the same point on the hierarchical system.
Maybe, well, maybe when you look at people who have like few years of experience and they are, fighting to be, to get to the mid position or senior position or something like that. But I guess it depends on the company. In our case, we are a software house, so we don't have really a lot of like internal politics or something, right? We don't have a product. We don't have like this hierarchy of managers in a product or areas of product or something like that. We are just working for different clients. So maybe it's not a good opportunity for conflict. Or maybe you
Okay.
just want to work for, a more interesting client. Sometimes hard to say.
I think you've just got like your employees are just too polite. That's the problem here. No no
Mhm.
books being thrown across the workplace, no chairs being held at each other. It's too polite, mate. We have got a question coming in from Anton. They're asking, how would you suggest using these generational buckets in practice as opposed to the typical checks of the needs of a particular group of people you're managing? And how would you address that? So, things like consisting of various personalities, ages, genders. Like, how would you take these details and use the generational buckets to resolve issues there?
Yeah, so some of those stuff kind of checked out, but if we have just two people in the 50s, it's difficult to make statistics of that. But like
Hmm.
one example is that actually I had a guy who was in the 50s and he actually was doing a bit of overwork. I had to stopping him basically. So maybe I had this consciousness that this might be happening, so I have to take special care whether he's not working too much, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes when I'm talking with Gen Z about pay raises, then I have to like keep the poker face because sometimes I'm a bit surprised. Like, but it's also connected with there is this phenomena, Dunning-Kruger effect. So basically the competence and confidence, right? There is the surge of confidence after you are like 1 or 2 years in a field. You feel very confident, but you're not very competent yet. And people have, when you are like, let's say young meat or have some experience as junior developer, there is this moment when you feel that yeah, you are very good now. You're like nine out of 10 in Java, 9 out of 10 in this technology, and I should earn as much as seniors, right? But it goes away after a year or so, and then you realize how broad the field is basically, and how little you know. So people are more, have more humility after
What
few years of
was
experience.
what is that saying? I think it's a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, right?
Yeah.
Compared to someone who's like, I don't know what I'm doing. The person who's like, oh yeah, I've got like 2 months of experience on this, and then all of a
Yeah,
sudden,
it works on my machine. I'm a senior developer. Yeah, but this is more like statistics. Again, to answer the question. So I'm kind of sometimes I use this to mentally prepare if I don't know people, right? But usually often I have people that kind of defy the statistics. So the key is basically to get to know your people, I guess,
okay.
and be mindful.
So I think that is all the questions we actually have right now, Powell.
All right,
But
cool.
once again, if people want to reach out to you, there you go. Scan the links, get in
Yes.
contact with him. Ask him about what's in the background there. He had to refrain from showing me. He's like, it goes all the way along, but he didn't want to ruin the camera perspective.
Yeah, I can try to
Oh, there we go.
show you the
Whoa.
perspective.
Oh, you weren't kidding. Wow.
I
Okay,
wasn't
full
kidding.
length.
There's 75 or so of Lego Technic, and the oldest is actually from 1977, so it's older than me.
Damn. All right, so we've got a distinguished collector. There you go, guys. Multiple things you can talk with him about. But Powell, absolute pleasure to talk to you, mate. I think we'll let you go now, but some
Thank you
really
very
cool
much.
insights. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Have a nice day. Bye bye.
Goodbye. All right, guys. So that brings us to a close of day number 1. That's right. We're only 1 day down, and we already overloaded you with that much knowledge. I mean, you're getting your good bang for buck here. If you did miss out on any of the speeches, any of the talks, remember these are all going to be available recorded after the events. So you'll be able to go back and watch them. But it's time to come to a close for day number 1. Day number 2 will kick off same time as today. So that is going to be 10 a.m. for the people local to Eastern Europe. For me, a Brit, I had to wake up at like 6 a.m. to be ready for 8 a.m. Cry a tear for me. But I want to give a really big shout out to not only all you for tuning in and all the staff working behind the scenes and all of our speakers, but I also want to just give a quick recap of the sponsors who, of course, made this event possible. So big shout out to the bronze sponsors, Fitler Europe. We've got the platinum sponsor, big boys, Progress Software. We've got a bunch of golden sponsors here. So Swedbank, Cloud AMQP, Dev Experts, So Cyber, and of course Revolut. And then finally, our in-kind sponsors, Battery and Telia. They will be alongside us throughout the days to make sure that this goes smoothly. Hopefully, you will join me once again tomorrow when the action kicks off to just remind people that's going to be 10 a.m. Eastern European time, or if you're in Western Europe, it's going to be 8 a.m. in the morning. So make sure you've got your coffee ready. Make sure you've got it in your hands because tomorrow we're going to have about, I think, another 30 hours or so of content coming from day number 2. But that's going to be it for now. Make sure you leave feedback on these sessions. Make sure you get engaged and take the opportunity for the rest of this day to connect all the people you listen to. They are very insightful people, very knowledgeable, and I can tell you they are very approachable. So take full advantage of that. And I will see you all again bright and early when we kick off day number 2 tomorrow. Toodaloo.